Have you ever found yourself questioning if someone in your life is a narcissist? That is what we're talking about today in the specific context of divorce. So, in the last episode, hopefully you've caught it. If not, if you're here for the first time, be sure to go and check it out. I interviewed Molly, and she's back today for a part 2 episode on narcissism, specifically as it relates to divorce. We talked about so many different things when it comes to this and how to recognize signs and how to understand different behavior and what you can do as the person on the receiving end. So I think this conversation is the perfect follow up to the conversation we had last week. Be sure to check out our last episode. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a conversation here. Be sure to follow along for more. And with that, let's get into part 2 with Molly. Molly, welcome back to the Happiness Happens podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. When we were chatting on our last episode, which went live right before this episode, after we stopped recording, we got to chatting a little bit about the different personalities or dynamics or things that come up when we are found in the situation of going through a divorce or wanting a divorce or in the initial stages of thinking about you want a divorce. And we started talking about narcissism, narcissistic tendencies. And so I wanted to focus this conversation today a little bit about that so we could go a little bit deeper. But first, before we dive into anything, and I'm not going to ask you what happiness means to you because we've already covered that in the last episode, but let's start by just sort of differentiating actual like narcissistic personality disorder versus someone who may just have tendencies.
Yeah, I mean, there's all varying levels. And, narcissism is something that we throw around really easily. Like, he's a narcissist, he's a narcissist. Well, there's a lot of people that have narcissistic traits and narcissistic tendencies that find us in situations where they're very difficult to deal with. They're combative, argumentative. There's almost like the rules don't apply to them is kind of my way to explain. But I do want to say, before we even go down any road of our discussion, if somebody finds themselves in a truly narcissistic, abusive relationship where they are unsafe in their home, they're unsafe in their body, them or their children are feeling unsafe, they need to get immediate help and seek help within their community, women's shelter, etc. This conversation doesn't necessarily apply to that level of fear and that level of abuse.
I'm really glad that we made that distinction, that you want to highlight this part of the conversation, because you're right. I think we can throw out different terms, and especially as like you hear, this is kind of like I'm going to call it like a bit of like a mess that social media makes. Okay. People will start talking about different things, and then all of a sudden everyone is lumped into everything, right? Because you can start to think, well, my partner has this and this, are they a narcissist? Or my partner has this and this, are they a narcissist? And so they may not actually be diagnosed, but could have different traits of it. And I think social media has created this narrative around narcissism, because I think that, and I know you're not a narcissism like expert or anything like that, but we're talking about this specifically in the terms of someone who might be going through divorce. But just from what I've experienced, it isn't black and white, and there's a lot of variation in between. And I think there's a difference between someone who has traits and like is aware of them and is like, oh, hold on, versus someone who doesn't realize at all,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And from the people that I have coached, most of the people going through a divorce that I have coached are divorcing somebody that has had some narcissistic tendencies. And I think we talked about this on the last episode. We don't go into our marriages hoping that they fail.
Exactly.
We want our marriage to work. And as the years unfold and as the personality traits unfold, and women and sometimes men are finding themselves trapped in these relationships where they're like, am I crazy? It's that whole gaslighting thing of feeling like, wait a minute, am I taking crazy pills or did this really happen? And so that's how you know if you're kind of in a relationship with somebody that has narcissistic tendencies, if they're making you feel crazy, making you feel like maybe that didn't happen, making you feel bad for the feelings that you have around a certain
Mhm.
situation, and like feeling manipulated or gaslighted. And basically just that overall feeling of walking on eggshells. Like, how is he or she going to be when they get home from work? Or
Yeah,
like jumping up from the couch to make sure that the kitchen is clean as the person pulls into the garage.
exactly. Exactly. So someone who you've been working with in the past, maybe a
Mhm.
client's come to you and feels like they're in this situation and they have a little bit of awareness about it and they have an idea, but they're not really sure at all what to do next. How do you begin to help someone identify these different patterns and then realizing that there's a different way of life that's available?
Yeah. So, really, through coaching and having discussions, having them be completely honest, like having the client tell me what circumstances are. It's pretty clear when they say
Yeah.
things like, I mean, I can't even leave my knife in the sink. I don't know what to expect. And you can almost hear their like
Panic.
anxiety rising.
Yeah.
You can hear their panic. So we talk a little bit about codependency. A lot of times they have the tendency to be a codependent if they're in a
Yeah.
relationship with a narcissist or somebody with narcissistic tendencies. So we'll talk a lot about what is the truth and really boiling down to what is the truth. And are they crazy? No. Did that circumstance actually happen? What is right and what is not right? And essentially, what do they want for their life?
Right.
So teasing apart and labeling somebody isn't necessarily going to solve anything. It's
Right.
finding out what do they want and are they in a happy marriage? And the chances are very high that their marriage is not successful
Yeah.
if they're with somebody with a personality disorder like that. And if that partner doesn't want to do extensive therapy and they can't do couples work, then we can discuss if they're going to go down the path for divorce.
That's really interesting. I find I find that a lot of the times like it can be a really hard shift to make from like that piece of awareness into action. And so what do you find needs to happen within the person that you're working with or that you're coaching in order for them to find the courage and like the strength to leave ultimately? Because I think a lot of times we can easily say, you know, I'm staying for the kids, or like, you know, I want to have my family, or, you know, this is, you know, the person that I chose and whatever. And it's kind of like that acceptance piece needs to happen. But it just, I don't know. I think it can just be sad when it doesn't, you know?
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants their marriage to fail. And
Mm,
so I think that there's a lot of pressure to stay in a marriage far longer than we would have wanted to stay,
mm-hmm,
especially if there's kids involved, especially if there's financial obligations, or maybe the one of the husband or wife don't work outside of the home. So there's a lot of considerations. And so my job is not at all to tell somebody they need to get divorced.
right.
My job is to help support and nurture the individual and the client to find out what is best for them,
Mm-hmm,
what makes sense for them in their life, and really have empowerment. Whether you stay or whether you go, we deserve to have a fulfilled life and a
mm-hmm,
life full of our own independent choices, our own independent thoughts, relationships, friendships, jobs, and autonomy.
mm-hmm,
So I will never convince somebody, yeah, you need to go, unless they're in an extremely abusive relationship. The choice is really up to the individual, but coaching can allow somebody to see things clearly. If you've
mm-hmm,
been in abuse or in an abusive relationship for so long, even if
mm-hmm,
it's emotional abuse, you
mm-hmm,
can't even see up from down. What is right and what is wrong?
right.
And then as we uncover things, what we realize is way back in the beginning, when we go back to the early signs, there was a lot more abuse for longer than maybe the individual even realizes.
That's really interesting. And so when you're doing this type of work and you're working with someone who has found themselves in this situation, how do you start to peel away? What is it ultimately that you're trying to help your client find? Is it that self-empowerment? Is it that worthiness? Is it that, inner strength? Because when you find yourself in a relationship with someone who's abusive, or, with narcissistic tendencies, or even narcissistic, personality disorder, like the whole thing, I think there's a huge hit that comes to like your own self-confidence. And I feel like you need to start to rebuild that. But like, how do you even rebuild that if all you've known is that breaking down for years and years and years and years?
Really, we got to just start with the truth of the paradigm. So we are conditioned very early on in our lives to believe things are normal or not normal. And it's the way that you were brought up. It's how you were raised as a child, what kind of things and factors happen to you, what your inner dialogue has been like, who all these pieces and parts within you, what they say, how much of a self-critique do you have? What got you to the point of choosing somebody with narcissistic tendencies in the first place? What got you drawn to that individual? So as we peel back and really start to identify the truth, and the truth means, what is your truth?
Right.
What is what you want? What is what you believe? And then we can kind of question those beliefs. Maybe they were conditioned that way because that's the relationship their parents had. Maybe they were raised in a situation where they didn't have a stable home. Maybe their mom was always in a more of a submissive type. So we can peel apart and identify, and nothing is bad.
Right.
Nothing is wrong. Nobody did it wrong. We all have our own version of truth and the way that we were brought up. So we call that the paradigm. And so then they step into this life and this marriage, and that continues for a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, however long they were married. And they're like, I don't even know what is right and what's wrong. So now we can figure out, what is your truth? And then who do you want to be? And it takes time. We don't find that in one hour session, but over time, they can really seek to understand. And that is my job, not to give anybody the answers, but help them come up with the answers for themselves. Because what I want for myself is different than what you want for yourself.
I agree. I agree with that. I think where I struggle, and maybe this is just probably because I don't have any kids myself, but where I struggle in understanding is like the idea of staying together for the kids. I've never really understood that. And I also come from a family, like my parents were also separated. And I've always really appreciated that they actually weren't together, because we were so much better off for it. And I don't know what your thoughts are on this. I would be curious to know them. But I do feel like there's like a little bit of that fear of being alone kind of hidden behind but I don't want to leave the kids because it's best for the kids. But what I think is kids watch that happen as they grow up. Kids watch and see dynamics and learn what is quote unquote right and what is quote unquote wrong, and how to treat people based off of how they're being raised, right? And so would you say and or agree, or what are your thoughts, whatever you want to say to this, like the idea that, that fear of being alone or fear of doing it alone could be at the crux of the I'm not leaving for because of the kids?
Yeah, I think those are probably, everything's kind of masked together.
Yeah.
I don't know that those are all individual silos. Like when you are a parent, you want to stay together for the kids because you don't want to mess your kids up.
Right.
Like, we don't want to mess our kids up. Like, is there too much screen time? Is it too much sugar? Is there, should we vaccinate or not? Should we get divorced? I mean, you don't want to mess up your children.
Right.
And that is heavy. You don't want to share custody. You don't want to not see your children every single night. You don't want to share a Christmas morning. You don't want to share every other weekend. You don't want them to have 2 homes. You want what's best for your children. And so there's a lot of pressure for that. And then it's also like, my entire identity is a mom now. Who am I without my ring and without my children? what am I going to do all weekend if I don't have my kids? We pray for a break. We pray for a moment of solitude. And then it's like they're gone for the entire weekend for the first time when you have joint custody and you're like, I mean, now what do I do?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of layers to that. And again, that's just kind of sitting with it, identifying it. But in my circumstance and in a lot of other circumstances, our children are better off because we are divorced than they would have been if we stayed together. And we've been able to co-parent effectively. We've been able to sit together at sporting events so they don't have to choose. Like, we are able to raise them in a way where it's okay. You know, it's not ideal. It's not what I ever designed, but they are okay. And I am a far better mother now than I would have been if I stayed in that first marriage.
Oh, wow. I definitely can see how that would be the case, though, because when you find your own voice and when you find that deep, like, self-empowerment, you break so many patterns for your kids, and you give your kids the opportunity to see what it looks like to, bet on yourself, but also to find the joy that you deserve. Because I think it can be hard I have a lot of friends who have kids, and it's very easy from my outside perspective to look in and sort of say, it's easy to wrap your identity up in being a mom, right? Because that's what you do day in and day out. But there's so much more to women than being a mom. Like, and it's a very important part, but it's like, who are you at the end of the day? Like, who are you at the crux of all of it?
Yeah.
Is, I think, something that a lot of moms feel like they just get forgotten and left behind.
Yeah, a lot of people step out of the workforce to be able to stay home, which is a beautiful thing. But you lose that identity. And as your kids grow, or if you get divorced, it's like, who am I?
Yeah.
So it's really important to reestablish that too in the divorce journey. Or if you're in a relationship that you're not happy, sometimes we can't be happy in a relationship if we're not happy with ourselves. That's right. And we're not feeling fulfilled in our own identity. So it is not our partner's responsibility, regardless if they have narcissistic tendencies or not, to fulfill our happiness. It is our own to really nourish. And it's not our children's to fulfill. And quite honestly, it's not ours to fulfill for our children. They are on their own path, and we are here to nurture and love them and guide them. But we are not responsible for their soul happiness on this earth.
That is really key, because kids need to learn how to live in their own life too. Because this is from my perspective, like, growing up and listening to a T to what my parents, felt or thought I should do, or how I should act, who I should be with, who I should not be with, like what I should do, what I should not do, all these things. And of course, like, you want to guide your kids, but then it creates this, like, complex. I think for me, it did anyways, because it was like, well, hold on. Now I have to look for that validation in everything that I do. And now I need to, like, make sure that, whatever parent is on board with this decision before I make it. And I'm 32 and I still look at life like that. And I'm like, oh my God, but, like, why can't I just make my own decisions without feeling the need, like, I need my parents to come and help me make that decision? You know what I mean? Like, it's crazy. And it's like, I'm a grown adult, a full grown adult. It's like, it's nuts. Oh, man.
Well, and there's a constant need. A lot of us, all of us, want validation, right?
Of course.
The human basic need is to be seen and heard. Like, we all just want to be seen and heard. And regardless of if you're in a marriage or if you're a grown woman and want approval, we all just need that in our lives. So we can do that for our kids, whether we're married or not, whether we're divorced or not. We can still show up for them, but also empower them in a way that, like, life isn't always this beautiful sunshine and roses path.
Yeah.
Like, this was hard, and you too can do hard things, and we can stand up for what we want and what we believe, and we can build our lives. And there's just so much beauty in letting our children understand that it's okay. Do they want to move to Europe, or they want to not go to college? Do they want to join the military? I don't know. I don't care. There's so much beauty. And when I was first married, I believed that I had to stay. I was Catholic. What would my parents think? What would my job think? What would my neighbors think if I put a for sale sign in the yard and took off my ring and had this big announcement that now I'm a divorced woman? And I felt a lot of shame around that. There was a lot of embarrassment and a lot of shame around that. And I think that that's natural, but it could be prevented if we can have more empowerment in who that it's okay. Like, we don't always have to have this most perfect life. And perfect is defined by societal standards.
I love that. I love that a lot. Now, for someone who might be in this situation right now, what would you suggest 3 steps be for them to start to develop maybe like a little bit of a different awareness or different perspective, or just take a next step?
Well, I firmly believe if somebody has decided that they do want to go for a divorce, or that they do, or they're very much considering a divorce, the 3 steps are: hire a coach or a therapist, hire a financial advisor, and hire a divorce attorney. So those 3 things are essential to somebody having the right tools and the right support system. The coach is going to help you carry that emotional burden. The financial guy is going to help you, or girl is going to help you figure out all the logistics. And then the divorce lawyer is somebody there really for support your legal rights. You can't do that without the 3 of those things.
Yeah.
If you're not ready for that, I still really think that there's a lot of steps to tapping into you, and coach or a therapist or a lot of meditation, stepping into what do you want in life by journaling, tapping into yourself and finding out what is your truth, clearing out all of the additional mess in our brains telling us like I'm bad or I'm shameful or whatever your narrative is. Like, really stepping into what do you want? And if judgment wasn't there and your shame around it wasn't there, what do you really want out of your life?
I love that. I think that's so beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me for the second part of our interview together. I loved our conversation so much, and I just think that it's so important to shed light on all of these different pieces, because there's a lot of stories that play in our minds in these really hard moments of life. And I think it's about understanding like what story is yours, which one is not yours, right? And what's your truth in the middle of all of that. And then also, just knowing that like you deserve to have a good life. And I think that just because, you've made choices that have gotten you where you are today, right? You chose the person that you had kids with, you chose your partner, maybe you don't have kids, either way, it doesn't matter. And that can be really hard, and that can be really challenging to navigate and figure out, because everybody is so different. And also at the same time, like, it is still your one life. I think to myself all the time, when I feel overwhelmed by all the things, I zoom out and I'm like, I'm literally on a spinning globe in the middle of nowhere. And so like, if we're all here and we're all put on this planet for a purpose, maybe the purpose is to be a mom, maybe the purpose is to be a wife, like maybe the purpose is all of the things, and that's great. And also, you are still you at the end of the day. And so I'm hoping this episode would be a little bit of a permission slip for someone who thinks, well, I can't leave because I have kids, or, I want this, ideal that doesn't actually even exist, and so on, so on. So anyway, so I could babble forever, but thank you for joining me. Is there anything else you want to add before we close off today?
No, what you said at the end really does sum it up. And there is no perfect marriage. You are not defined by your titles as a wife or a divorced woman, a mom or not a mom. I mean, whatever you are more than just your titles, and you are completely worthy and perfect as you are.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much, Molly, for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much.